So I think in order to understand the challenges, some of the advisories that have come from the Indian government, we first need to understand how AI output is actually generated. And basically, what happens is, and this is the seriously like a dumbing down of how it works, is um, what a GPT chatbot is. Basically, it's an NLP tool. So basically, it understands how we speak, as in, if I am saying this, then which word follows each word, in a sense, right? So it's a language processing training that happens, and the output that it gives is basically weighed against the input that you've given. So for any output, it is based on the training data that it's basically sucked up from the internet, and compressed and learned from, using basically statistical modeling for prediction. And then, in terms of the training that happens with weights being added to responses that it gives, or to certain data parts of the data, that's how basically a large language model or a neural network is constructed. And then, on the basis of how the quality of the responses, the accuracy of the responses, the legitimacy of the responses, it is fine tuned using additional contextual data, if at all, so that the answers are more accurate, or are what you want it to be, or answer likely to be what is useful to you. So uh, one of the things to remember is that this is all predictive in a sense. So if you go to, let's say, OpenAI's playground, you will see that there's a setting called temperature. A temperature is a probability setting, and in playground and in tools that you build yourself at times, so you have, using OpenAI's API, the ability to set the temperature of an output, which is that, for example, if my temperature setting is 0, the creativity of the output goes down, but the accuracy improves. At the same time, if my temperature is, let's say, 175, it will give me a wildly inaccurate output. Sometimes it won't even make sense. It won't be legitimate English. So basically, the user has three areas where they can actually impact the outcome. One is very clearly the context that you give to a GPT. Second is the prompt that you give to a GPT, so what you're asking it for. And third, if you is the temperature setting, which could be either determined by the system itself. So in a Gemini, you don't set the temperature, uh, and in OpenAI's ChatGPT, you don't set the temperature. But if you use the API, then you can set your own temperature, in a sense, right? So these are three things that greatly influence the outcome, and this essentially is important uh, when you have to think about both ownership of an output, as well as the liability of an output. And we'll get to that in a bit, but I want you to understand that an output here that you get from a GPT is not necessarily like it's not necessarily based on um, just the training data or everything that's on the internet, but it's also determined by the user. So what we've seen so far happening with the way government regulations, or talking about government regulations, have happened is that about little less than a year ago, like maybe a year and a half ago, there was talks that India will take a light touch approach to regulating AI. Last year, the talk was only high risk AI will be regulated. Um, then the Prime Minister spoke about Garba, and of like the deep fake of him dancing the Garba, etc. And once he spoke about it, all of a sudden the temperature around AI changed, in the sense that things started getting heated up. And in after he spoke about it, there were multiple meetings, not just two, actually multiple meetings that took place, both with Ashwini Vaishnav as well as Rajiv Chandrasekhar, that social media companies had. And there was an advisory that was issued around December, which I think we've missed over here, December 26th, which we will also talk about. Um, and subsequently, uh, things sort of quietened down, or maybe because of the change of the, like, because it was the new year. Um, they started getting heated again after someone uploaded a screenshot of Gemini being asked whether Prime Minister Narendra Modi is a fascist or not, and it gave a response saying that according to some people, there are tendencies or whatever. I don't know the exact phrasing, which led to a pushback from the Indian government. And finally, there's now an AI advisory that was issued. It was sent to social media companies. And I know it has been said by Ashwini Vaishnav recently that this was sent only to social media companies, but it wasn't. I know of AI company founders who also received this advisory, right? And there was criticism, there was global ridicule of this advisory, and we'll get into why there was ridicule. But after that, there is just remember, it's important to remember, the advisory has not been withdrawn, and there is nothing except statements saying, oh, it only applies to significant AI ventures, or it only applies to social media intermediaries. Oh, it's just an advisory and it's not legally binding. Um, so there's just interviews and tweets after this, but the advisory as it stands is still in play and it's not been withdrawn. Um, so welcome to lawmaking via advisory in a sense, right? What this advisory basically said was that, see, the IT rules as such, and this advisory was put on social media by a journalist, Asim Manchanda, who's usually ahead of the curve in sharing critical information. I'm a big fan of Asim; he's a good friend. Um, so what Asim basically tweeted in this advisory said was that this is a due diligence procedure by intermediaries and platforms. And according to the advisory, so all intermediaries are required to ensure that use of AI models, LLM, generative AI software, or algorithms does not permit users to host, upload, whatever, uh, or share any unlawful content as outlined in 3(1)(b) of the IT rules, or does not violate any other provision of the IT Act. Now, remember, prevention of sharing of information isn't really under Section 79A, and these IT rules are potentially not valid by themselves. Uh, and we'll get to the IT rules as well, the 3(1)(b) as well, but this advisory goes beyond the remit of the IT rules themselves, right? Because not ensuring that models do not permit users to share any unlawful content is not something that the law actually demands, or the rules even demand. Um, so, important phrases here: due diligence, intermediaries. So, there's a question whether AI software is actually an intermediary, or AI services are an intermediary, uh, or platform, or are they a publisher? So, does a platform have the liability, or does a user have the liability? Um, and a platform does not necessarily share content. So, another question is that in case of the Gemini controversy, who's responsible? Is the platform that generated the output responsible? Or is it the user who took a screenshot and put it on social media responsible? Who's doing the publishing? Who's doing the communication to the public? Who's really sharing that content? And of course, I'm not sure if that is legally, I mean, whether it's unlawful content or not, but it may be defamatory. In that case, a prime minister should file a complaint. But in any case of any unlawful content, also, who's doing the sharing? Is it the software? Is it the AI tool, or uh, the uh, uh, is it the user? Now, similar thing. that they shouldn't permit any bias or discrimination or threaten the integrity of the electoral process. Now, none of this is in the IT rules or in the IT Act, and there's no way for them to ensure that their resources are not used, uh, that the tools are not used. Now, this is the important one: use of under testing and unreliable artificial intelligence models. Now, I showed you right at the beginning about how AI outputs are dependent on multiple parameters. Um, and in that sense, what if someone gives context which is not necessarily legally sound, right? Or what is defamatory? And then 2 3 questions down the line, they publish an output which is they ask a question that repeats that context which is being given. So is that an unreliable AI algorithm, right? All AI tools basically hallucinate. Hallucination is when they give a completely unpredictable, sometimes gibberish outcome. Um, and how do you hold them? And there is no such thing as a reliable AI. Um, Even in terms of facts, there are instances where, let's say, I was looking for some information and I searched for it. I couldn't find it. Um, I remember asking Bard for that information eventually, and it suggested 2 articles that I should look at. And it even shared the links to those articles. And when I clicked on them, those links did not contain the information that the output said it had contained. It contained. So it's if the software has been optimized for being helpful, um, it can also be the case where it basically lies or tells an untruth or doesn't even know that it's telling an untruth. It's just trying to be helpful, right? It can misread things. So uh, what how do you define under testing? All Even today when you use ChatGPT, the inputs that you provide, the thumbs up that you give, the the time every time you edit an answer or you edit a prompt, all of that is used to further train the AI. In that sense, it's always evolving. So that's one part of it. Then the other is, what is the Indian internet? There is the internet. How do you then? So if you require explicit permission of the government of India, then that means that those who do not have the permission of the government of India will have to start banning Indian users. So, these are all tricky things that seem to have found their way into an advisory that reveals actually a great deal of ignorance, to be honest, about how AI works, um, which is very surprising because Mr. Chandrasekhar actually understands these things fairly well, at least from what I have seen. Right. So, again, labeling outputs, giving a consent pop up on a regular basis, all of these are going to inhibit usage in a sense, right? All AIs already have a statement saying that they are unreliable in terms of the output. That's usually it's just language processing. Um, the other part is that users must be clearly informed about terms of service, and this is a standard due diligence process. But again, the key phrases that stand out for me in this advisory are under testing, unreliable, the use of the phrase Indian internet, the demand for the explicit permission of the government of India to deploy an LLM. These are all problematic in terms of how they're phrased. Uh, Now, other facts is about whether again about generation or modification of text in terms of information that can be used as misinformation. Now, the problem here is that how do you it's one thing to be able to determine a deepfake or manipulation in an audio or a video or an image. How do you do it in case of text? So I really don't understand whether how they've thought this through. How do you prevent the creation or the generation of misinformation as text using an AI platform. AIs don't guarantee any accuracy of output. How will they do fact checking at source? So, you know, they the requirement here is that it needs to be labeled with a permanent, unique metadata identifier. Frankly, no one's been able to solve this problem simply because every time you do include permanent, unique metadata identifier, there is in an image or a video, there is software to remove it. All watermarking can be removed. Similarly, how do you do watermarking on text? No one has solved that problem, right? There are tools for identifying whether content is AI generated or not, but those are not really certain in terms of that outcome. When you look at, if you look at it a couple of days ago, Google started prioritizing AI generated content websites. And the way it's doing it is that's what's conjecture because Google never discloses how it's doing it. The way Google is believed Google is doing it is just by the sheer volume of output. Whether there is, if there is a vast amount of content being auto-generated and published on a site where there's been, let's say, a 2x, 3x increase in the amount of content, or there, let's say, an article or a piece of content being published every few seconds, is using, that's the assumption that it's using that mechanism. How you can't identify what, like, misinformation being generated or AI generated content online in terms of text, except by trying to do a reverse engineering mechanism. Then again, the identifier needs to, again, identify whether this is like which software it is, etc. These identifiers are impossible to run. Now, as I mentioned, there are ministers. I think Ashwini Vaishnav has said that this is just an advisory, and it's non-binding. But very clearly, the advisory states that you need to ensure compliance with immediate effect and submit an action taken report to the ministry within 15 days. So again, if it's non-binding, what is this demand for an action taken come status report to the ministry? I'm going to just go back to now Mr. Chandrasekhar's response on Twitter, saying, and pardon the typo, but it says that it's only for large platforms and will not apply to startups. You saw the text of the advisory. It doesn't apply to large platforms. It applies to all AI platforms. Saying that, and he's sort of positioning this as an insurance policy to platforms who can otherwise be sued by consumers. That it's clearly not. It's basically, I mean, consumers can't sue a platform for an output it generates right now simply because it's not been determined whether the platform is actually liable for that content or not. And if that does happen, then we'll see it's clearly not being done for the benefit of the platforms to be honest. Like, it's pretty evident. And he says that platforms do not have safe harbor or free pass vis-a-vis unlawful content. This is the law as it exists. Now, safe harbor is lost only when there is actual knowledge of unlawful content under the IT Act. And following Shreya Singhal, actual knowledge basically means either a court order or a government order. So platforms do have safe harbor unless there is a complaint, unless there's a government order or a court order, technically. So I'm not sure whether what Mr. Chandrasekhar is saying over here is legally sound or not. And again, he's saying that a major platform needs to take permission from the government. Now, this advisory is under rules that are under due diligence requirements. None of this basically envisages taking permission to launch a service or permission to deploy a platform. That is not a part of the due diligence requirements as far as we can see. So, we're seeing rules being changed via advisories. Uh, and again, the issue of the Indian internet. Now, let's go back to the December 26th advisory, which we have also seen. Now, that advisory basically talks about saying that in the terms and conditions of platforms, you should mention the rules. You should mention what content is not permitted in a clear and precise language. And it also says that you need to give users regular reminders at every instance of login and while uploading and sharing information on the platform. I think if a consent pop up happens every instance of login or every time you upload or share information on the platform, which is what effectively, technically adding a prompt is, um, you're just going to, you have to have two clicks where one should suffice, right? You'll just be uh, get tired of pressing OK. You'll be consent fatigue at a different level. Um, and the advisory also says that intermediaries are under obligation to report legal violations to law enforcement agencies. As far as my understanding and my non legal understanding of both the IT Act as well as the rules are that there is no obligation to report legal violations here. Um, and it says intermediaries should identify and remove misinformation that is patently false, untrue, or misleading in the nature that, or in terms of impersonation or deep fakes, right? Social media platforms can not be directed to automatically remove such content. Someone needs to file a grievance and then they need to act on it, or there needs to be a court order, and then they need, or a government order for that specific piece of content, and then they need to act on it. So there seems to be a dissonance between what the law is, what the rules are, and what the advisory says. But I think all three are important to look at because when the Digital India Act comes in, this is giving us an indication of how AI regulation will shape up in the Digital India Act. So, I've already covered this advisory part, but let's just quickly go into the IT Act and the and 31B as well. That, like I said, it's about receiving actual knowledge, and actual knowledge, according to Shreya Singhal, is court order or government order. And 31B says that the intermediary shall inform its rules and regulations, privacy policy, etc., to the user. So 31B is merely about providing information. It's not about taking down content. It's not about reporting illegal content. They have to make reasonable efforts to prevent users not to upload. It's not 100% requirement. So I'm not sure where how this advisory actually, if you look at it, correlates to 31B. I haven't got the pieces of content that are in 31B. That's a fairly long thing, but I just thought it's important to see what the demand that 31B makes. And the advisory uses the words repeatedly, ensure, but 31B has no requirement to ensure prevention of illegal content on the platforms. So at the end of the day, it's about ownership and liability, right? Who owns an AI output? And we still don't know who does. There was a court case around over copyright, saying where a scientist basically went to court saying that an AI should be treated as a person and the owner of copyright, and the court rejected that notion. There is also the Air Canada case where uh, an AI chatbot that was used by Air Canada basically made up a discount offer for a customer, and the customer then sued Air Canada for not honoring that offer. And the court decided that since the chatbot was deployed by Air Canada, it's their responsibility. But again, it's not clear about whether uh, it is the platform's liability on, right? Um, the other question is, when is the model actually ready? When is it being tested? When is it ready? What is an unreliable model? At what percentage threshold of hallucination? Is it a reliable model or an unreliable model? Why is it that factual accuracy is being expected of a NLP model, which is just basically putting words together in terms of what the language output should be? Can't rely on it for facts for sure. How do we even test AI? If the government is going to greenlight AI software, what are our bureaucrats going to do? Are they going to sit and type prompts to see whether the output is to their liking or not? What mechanisms do they have really for testing LLMs that are going to be deployed? Um, who's liable for a screenshot of a defamatory piece of content generated by AI and published on social media? No clarity, right? How do we legally deal with hallucinations? Who's liable for hallucinations in a sense? And most importantly, is an AI chatbot an intermediary or a publisher? Because the treatment in these advisories is that of an intermediary, but the requirement seems to be similar to that of a publisher. And so, when is something seen to be published? Social media is pretty clear. It's when something is on the platform and available to the public to view. But a chatbot is having a conversation with an individual. Is that publishing? Um, that's a private conversation between a chatbot and an individual, influenced, like I said, by many other factors. I think at the end of the day, this is the key question here. That more importantly, the very first question I asked: who's responsible for the output? Um, should a social media platform be responsible for 100% removal of AI generated misinformation or impersonation? That's what the advisory seems to suggest, but the rules certainly don't. And the tricky part is, how do you tell that a video is fake? How do you tell whether text is fake? How do you tell whether audio is fake? Who determines that something is fake, right? So the scale at which content is being generated even today is immense. How do you regulate this? Um, I have no clue. And sorry, so that's the presentation side from me. Rakesh, we can stop recording.